Welcome to the Cancer Has No Borders podcast. My name is Zach Randles-Friedman. Today, I'm really thrilled to invite Heather Badt to our show. She's the Chief Operating Officer at the Cancer Support Community. Heather also has a unique story because she was not only a patient, but a caregiver because her and her husband were diagnosed with cancer 1.5 weeks apart. Thanks so much for joining the show, Heather. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
So Heather has a very unique perspective on cancer, and we're going to talk about this today because she was not only a patient, but she was also a caregiver, and she works at the cancer support community. So she has three different pieces of her life that have been affected or involved with cancer. So tell me a little bit about how you found out that you had cancer.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that opportunity because it lets me bring up screening. So, my husband was 49 and had planned to do a colonoscopy. He had some other side issues that were going on that led us to get an upper GI added to that screening that he needed.
Okay.
During that time, he then got diagnosed with esophageal cancer. So while I was in the hospital, in the waiting room, and he was doing all of his testing for us to make a plan for him, I needed to then say, okay, we just got dealt a card called esophageal cancer. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
What is about to come my way? What can I control? So what I came up with is, oh, I can take something off my list. What can I take off my list? I need to get a mammogram done in a few months. So I moved it up and I got my mammogram done while I was waiting for him and some of his tests. That led to a stage 1 triple negative breast cancer diagnosis. So I was extremely fortunate because that's a very aggressive breast cancer. And I'd had a mammogram 5 months before. Since I had dense breasts, they had recommended that I go every 6 months. So I was very, very lucky to be diagnosed so early and that I chose to follow my screening and not deprioritize self-care.
That's a great thing to do, to tell people it's so important to do the screenings, right? I mean, and to follow when your doctor says to do it. And how did you react whenever you were diagnosed after finding out that your husband a week and a half earlier was diagnosed?
It was shocking. And I think right at that particular second, the hardest part is he was emotionally so distraught that I couldn't share it with him. So my parents and I were the only people that knew what I was going through while I was getting some additional testing. So I think it was in a million years, I wasn't expecting him to have cancer, let alone me. And to have to keep it a secret was a strange situation, but what we thought was best for his mental health right at that moment.
So how long did you wait to actually inform him?
It was probably around a week because it was getting suspicious because when I needed to go in for extra tests for me, he couldn't understand why I wouldn't go with him to an appointment he had. And so other family was helping us with everything, but he was questioning why I wouldn't come with him. And so I felt at that point I needed to tell him. However, we didn't yet tell our children because I was waiting for genetic testing results for myself to know how extreme my treatment and procedures were going to be.
So tell me about the children because that's so important and it's a hard thing to tell your children. So I have a sister-in-law who had breast cancer and she never told her children until they were out of college.
Wow.
And so tell me about how you told your children and do you is it was it I know it's hard obviously, but do you recommend that?
So there's so much to that
Yeah.
question. Let's see here. So yes, I think it's important. My kids were 10 and 7. No, sorry, they were 10 and 13 at the time that we were both diagnosed. So we had already told them about Rich, and I guess I'll pause there for a moment because it was hard to get resources to guide us on how to communicate. And so that's one area that I would say cancer support community has a ton of material and content to support children that I didn't know about at that time. I was working with a private therapist is how I got information because I got put in a 3-week queue for the support services at the hospital. We didn't have 3 weeks to wait to tell the story we needed to our children. So that was very difficult and frustrating as a parent wanting to be able to tell a story and not being equipped to know how to do that in a way with language that they could understand at an age appropriate
Yeah.
method to give them hope, but not a false story. We knew we didn't know a lot of answers yet. Concurrently, I didn't want to tell them about me because I was so concerned about a double whammy.
Yeah.
And I also didn't know, in the end, I needed chemo, radiation, and a lumpectomy, but I didn't know if I was going to be doing a double mastectomy. I didn't know what I was going to be choosing to do because I fortunately wasn't BRCA positive, but I was anticipating I was going to be. And that whole story is very different of level setting with a child of what to expect of what your parent
Yeah.
being out of commission for and what parts of their life you're not going to be able to participate in certain ways. Concurrent to my lumpectomy, my son who was in middle school, his school was fortunate that they had a grant given to them with the Cancer Support Community of Greater Philadelphia. And they led a program called Straight Talk About Cancer. And so it was a program that was embedded in the school. It was during homeroom. So it was not an extra transportation need that I had to get him somewhere. It wasn't something that he was missing an activity or a club or feeling different. It wasn't him having to give up anything. And it was a blend of education and also being with 4 other children who had a family member impacted by cancer. So it made you feel not alone, and he learned. And so one of my standout moments, I have a handful of them, but one of my standout moments is I'd spent a lot of time stressing about how do I explain to 2 young boys their mom's about to lose their hair. I had no idea what their reaction to that would be. And when I sat to tell them, I was halfway through my sentence, and my son, Justin, who was in middle school at the time, got so excited when I was telling him because he understood what chemo was doing in the body and that it was getting rid of the bad cells because of what he
Okay.
learned in that program.
Wow.
And I'm like, in a million years, I never would have thought to explain to my children from that perspective. And that gift of removing that burden and that stress from me of like, oh, he understands, it's a good thing, and a different way to communicate was just amazing.
Yeah. Tell me about being a caregiver and a patient at the same time. And it sounds like you had family there to maybe help out, and I'm sure that was important, but you're still Rich's caregiver, he's your caregiver, you're supporting each other. Tell me about that.
So lucky that we had community, friends, family, wonderful neighbors. Everybody helped. And at the same time, no one can fill the role of that significant other in the same kind of way. So it was very, very difficult. We were lucky that we were both being treated in the same healthcare system. So our doctors and nurses all knew what we were both going through. And the healthcare team was very supportive and communicative. My husband had a lot of complications, and they were very good with helping level set days where they knew that they needed to say, we have him right now. He's okay. He's stable. Go home and nap or go home and take care of the kids.
Yeah.
Between us and a family member that's here, you need to prioritize self care. And that was critical because as a caregiver, it's very hard to prioritize your self care. And having that collaboration with that team helping remind me of that was really important.
Yeah, I think people also a lot of times don't even think about the mental health issues that
Mhm.
I mean, your family having 2 people at the
Right.
same time, but even just one person having cancer, there's such a mental health for the
Yes.
entire family. How did were you already part of the cancer support community whenever you or that this you joined them after?
Correct. I worked in corporate America, and I was so touched and impacted by the work that my son was able to participate in his school. And, I'll say I learned about a ton of amazing organizations during our experience. There's so many advocacy groups out there that exist to help people with a variety of different needs. That one just touched me so deeply as a parent, and I felt like I could use some of my skills in a different way to help people because I didn't know what I didn't know before we went through this. And so that led me to want to have a career and leave corporate America and move to cancer support community.
Tell me about what you would do or what advice you would give somebody when they found out when they're being diagnosed. What's the first thing they should do?
Take a breath. um, Learn facts. Do not go to the internet.
Okay.
Make sure if you can have an advocate. So whether that's a friend or a family member, but to learn and listen and ask questions with you along the way because it's a foreign language that you're learning. And so to absorb it all intellectually and emotionally is really difficult. And so having somebody else go through that with you is critical. Understanding your decision timelines, your treatment options, getting a second opinion, all those pieces I think are really, really important and not being afraid to ask for help. As you brought up, whether it's mental health help or logistical help with transportation, with finances, there are resources that exist for people.
And what do you think that a patient, once they're diagnosed, should they feel comfortable reaching out to someone and, a caregiver because another podcast we've talked about and as I've talked with patients, we've talked about how when the person is diagnosed with cancer, of course, it's horrible for them, but you have a whole family. And on a
Mhm.
previous guest that we had, she said it's usually it's around an average of 12 people that's impacted by one person having cancer. So you were fortunate enough to have your family there to really help you. If someone didn't have a family, how important is it to reach out to friends
Yeah.
or even colleagues that you work with or, you know?
Well, I think there it's critical, and I think there is also many suggestions for long distance caregiving too. So even if you may not have local family
Yeah.
and friends, there are ways people can help from a distance, even if it's doing research on symptoms and side effects for you and giving you suggestions or helping research a second opinion physician to look into. Like there are things from a distance that people can help with, and I have found most people want to help, they don't know how.
Yeah.
And so they will say, "Oh, I'd love to help, let me know what to do." Well, that you just gave another job to the patient and or caregiver. However, that's a reality. And so I think one of the greatest things that we found at the time is use technology as your friend because it's a full-time job to keep the family and friends up to date. And so there's many options that exist, but use an online tool if you can. Not everyone has the ability to have internet access or is comfortable with technology, but there's many tools that exist where you can keep up to share your story of what's happening right now with your treatment or a calendaring system for the type of help. So, for instance, we needed help getting our kids to and from their activities so they could maintain that norm.
Yeah.
Or you will need somebody to help pick up groceries for you or a prescription at the pharmacy. There's a ride to the doctors. There's endless doctor's appointments. So figuring out how to share what's happening with you that they want to know, but where it's not a burden to the patient and caregiver, but also having specific direct asks of help, which is uncomfortable as a patient or caregiver, but makes a huge difference. And people are so appreciative to know how to help and want to help.
So Heather, let me ask you this question. When you said you waited a little while to tell your kids and then you had a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. My questions are, what was the reaction between them? Were they the same or different? And should people be afraid to tell their children? I mean, should they get it out of the way? Kids know a lot of times. Like whenever I was telling you about my sister-in-law before, and when she told
Mhm.
her oldest child, he said he knew something was going on. So that kids know when something's up.
Right.
What's your advice? And what was the reaction of the two kids?
Sure. So I completely agree with you. I think they know what the normal vibe in a house is, what the normal rhythms of people coming and going and phone calls, and if you're uh, open or secretive normally or not. And so that is why we definitely felt like we needed to tell them after the first couple days because there was so much happening in a different way in our home with phone calls and appointments and comings and goings they know. They could feel the vibe that stuff was going on, and I didn't want to lose the trust as a family unit that we had.
Yeah.
And so while I didn't want to alarm them and I wish I had more details, we worked with the facts we had at that moment
Yeah.
and committed that we would continue to keep them posted along the way. My younger son's first reaction was, "Oh, dad has cancer. That's deadly. Is he going to die?" He went right there, was his reaction. And I pretty much feel like his consistent approach throughout our entire experience was, as a 10-year-old, I want to go play. I want to be with my friends. I don't want to be in this environment, but tell me if it's extreme. If it's not extreme, I don't want to know all the ins and outs. My older one, who was also able to participate in the program where he learned about what was happening in our bodies and what cancer means, he wanted to know more information along the way. If I was at the hospital visiting, what happened that day. He did want to go visit my husband. He was comfortable looking at my head after I lost all my hair instead of the hat being on and covering it. So he was more interested in information from the detail perspective and the science perspective. Like, both
Yeah.
angles interested him, and he's pre-med right now
Oh,
in college. So I feel like the two of them handled it very differently, and we tried to work with who they were, which was hard. Like, my husband, who was in the hospital, I think at that time, it was hurtful to him that my younger one didn't wanna see him, and in hindsight was appreciative that we respected each of them for who they were and met them where they were.
yeah. I mean, I can imagine how he felt, like, yeah, but I mean, you gotta respect
Yeah.
his feelings, so, um, tell me about your emotions kind of as you're going through your treatment, as you're, learning that you have cancer. I mean, the mental health is
Mhm.
serious, and what emotions did you have going through both
Sure.
of this?
Well, I'll share that I had never taken any medicine prior, for, like, anti-anxiety or depression, and I was very thankful that I did do that right away, even before I knew I needed it. Aside from doing that, I really felt like I needed to compartmentalize my emotion. I needed to focus on all the support that my husband and my children needed and making sure I was adherent to all the things I needed to do for my care, but I couldn't really be in the emotion of it because I needed to be there for everyone else's
Yeah,
emotions. I absolutely found a therapist, but that was more prioritized after we got through some of the heavier stuff. And I focused on making sure my husband had the mental health support he needed. And so we got palliative care in the hospital. We made sure at home he needed services and support to come to our house, and knowing to ask for that and advocate for that until he was well enough to go. So for me personally, I needed to back burner the emotional support. And I will say, I even vividly remember friends wanting to go for, like, what did I need? And one example is I said, I just want to go for a walk for 10 minutes around the block and don't ask me a single thing about cancer. I
yeah.
just want for 10 minutes to go for a walk and not talk about it.
Kind of going back to the whole, having caregiver and having community to support.
Mhm.
Did you ask, neighbors? Did you ask friends? Did you ask for support, or do they just kind of volunteer it? And if they didn't, like, what advice would you give people that know someone that have cancer?
I think I'd say both. And we had a couple friends that immediately put a meal train together. And so they got a meal plan together and had people sign up for it and asked us. They did some research on their own because my husband had a lot of eating and nutrition challenges with his type of cancer, and so they had done some research and then asked me to validate the plan that they put together
Okay.
and how to balance that with also what my children would want and what do they eat. And so that was a lot of work for them, but made a big impact and was helpful. And then aside from that, I felt like a lot of people generically say, "How can I help?" They don't know what to do. But what I would suggest is, if you're already in your day-to-day life going to the pharmacy or going to the market or mowing the lawn or picking up dry cleaning, call that person and say, I'm about to go do this, or tomorrow I'm doing this. May I get anything for you on my way? Because it makes them feel less of a burden and it's
Yeah.
a specific ask.
Yeah. And personal story for me is that my aunt was diagnosed with cancer, and she was the type of person that was very it was very hard for her to ask for
Yeah.
any help. She didn't want help. She felt that her son, who's my cousin, was she was burdening even today when she's gotta go for a checkup, he wants to go with her still,
Right.
and she feels like it's such a burden on him, and he's like, "It's not a burden, and I wanna be there, and I wanna
Right.
do this, and I w you know, you're my mom," and I think that's an important message for people.
I agree. It's very hard to ask for help, especially if that's not what your norm is and you were giving up so much of who you are to begin with.
Yeah,
And so it's you think it's that one last bit of control, except it also can make all the difference. And you may not feel well. Maybe you do need someone to drive you to appointments that day, or you need someone to drive your child to a haircut.
yeah.
Or, one of our friends, this was a great one. One of our friends said, whatever movie it was, some new movies out, and their kids were older. They said, "How about we take the 2 kids this weekend? Can we take them to lunch and a movie?" I was like, "Yes, that is amazing." I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, awesome. What advocacy organizations would you kinda suggest? I guess it depends on the cancer, but is there a certain advocacy organization that you was like, "Oh, I went there and I learned so much about being a caregiver or about my cancer," or kinda like what you were just saying, reaching out for people. It's okay to reach out to people because people do wanna help.
Yeah, I mean, I have a list a mile long, so that's hard for me to answer. I guess I'm gonna start backwards, which is we at Cancer Support Community, we have a free helpline, and so if there's depending the type of need someone has, and we do an assessment with them, we refer people out to other organizations. So it's not just for support at Cancer Support Community, but also we have a whole network that we work with and get people to the best place to help them. But it's endless. I mean, there was an organization that offered to give us a backpack of school supplies so we wouldn't have to do that for my children. There's organizations that help pay for wigs. There's organizations that can help with financial concerns, that can help with, at one point, we had a grant from an organization that helped with housing. Like there's literally endless amounts that exist. So it's figuring out what type of needs you have and then pairing it up, which is why I kind of started with the use our helpline, because you don't have the time or luxury to learn all that and figure it out at
Yeah.
the minute you have it. But there's someone there that can do that for you.
What advice would you give to someone who doesn't necessarily live in a major city, so they don't have access to the best doctors or whole healthcare system? What's your advice for somebody that's been diagnosed and lives in an area like that?
Yeah, I think it's a huge issue with rural patients and caregivers, as well as even depending on if you even if you live in a large area, you might have transportation issues or you may not have the insurance coverage you need. There's a million different barriers for access. And I think understanding what is possible and whether it's an organization or resources exist to enable you to get the best care you can. And so I think figuring out how to get your still learn your treatment options and setting yourself up to adhere to it, because treatment adherence is an issue, and especially if you have to go really far distances for treatment, are you going to be able to sustain it?
Yeah. I mean, I think your story is remarkable just because you got the test before you were supposed to even to get the early detection. I mean, it's like it was meant to be in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, and I don't know, I feel like it's such a fortunate thing
I
that
agree
happened to
with
you.
you.
Yeah,
I mean, people are like, "Oh," I was like, "Guess what? I call it lemonade." To me, that is
yeah.
like one of my handful of like, I'm thankful. Like, I'm not happy that I had cancer, but I am extremely thankful.
What are 2 things that you could say to the audience that you learned by
Ooh.
being a patient? And if the 2
Oh, being a
biggest
patient.
things.
Okay. That every single person's experience is different. So I would say, as a patient, my experience was very textbook from what the doctor told me to expect. My husband, as a patient, didn't have anything the way it was supposed to go. So I think every single person's experience is going to be unique and different, even if you have the same cancer. And that You have just entered an experience that you couldn't possibly have prepared for that is going to be more overwhelming physically and mentally than and not just during treatment, beyond.
Yeah. And what about as a caregiver? What 2 things did you learn?
You don't anticipate that you just got a second and third job,
Mhm.
and how critical being able to advocate for somebody else is.
What do you think about genetic testing?
I mean, I mentioned earlier, I think it's critical. My husband and I both got genetic testing. We were concerned for our children as well as to inform our treatment decision making. So I personally think it's very important to do and to ask what considerations you'd be able to be considered for, even if it's not brought up to you, for you to proactively ask.
Can you talk a little bit about what tools are available for support from your organization? So as a patient coming in, a newly diagnosed patient, what tools could they come and get from your organization?
Lots.
Okay.
So, one of the things that's unique about cancer support community, I'll speak about our direct services in a moment, but we also do have an advocacy and policy arm. So, if someone wanted to get involved and help locally or from a federal level advocate for different rights and uh, help make a difference in that aspect, you can, as well as psychosocial research, so that emotional well-being, we do collect information from patients and caregivers that are interested in participating in that, and that helps us be able to learn from patients and caregivers' voice and their experience to then inform our direct services and our policy priorities.
Yeah.
So with the direct services, the range covers education materials that are free on our website that cover pretty much any topic and are cancer specific as well as general. We have the free helpline. We have brick and mortar locations, so there's over 196 locations inside the US and outside. So if someone prefers virtual support, we have that. But if you want to go and participate in a healthy eating class or a yoga class or just be with other people, it's not necessarily therapy. It's just being with other people that maybe can relate to your experience and participating in an activity with them. So it's a pretty broad group. There's decision making tools to help you figure out how to collaborate with your significant other to make treatment decisions, because that's a whole area that what a patient wants and wants to decide for their quality of life and the decisions most times I find doesn't totally match up to what the caregiver would say.
Um, do you see patients that have come and got your services after they've gone through their treatment and they're in a better place? Do you see them now coming back and wanting to be involved and volunteer and do what they can to help other patients? Is that pretty common?
Oh,
Because you
absolutely.
did a complete career shift from,
Yes.
from,
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And I think there's many ways to give back. So obviously, aside from, the literal write a check, there's ways to volunteer,
yeah.
there's ways to share your voice in our research, there's ways to advocate with the policy aspect, and even just sharing that tools like this exist to somebody else. I think that is like the biggest gift of all, because when you're diagnosed or someone you know is, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. And my last question for you is having both you and your husband being diagnosed with cancer around the same time, how are you both now looking at life differently?
I definitely don't sweat the small stuff.
Okay.
I know that's very cliche, but I
It's
really
not.
try to use my experiences to inform what I choose to get upset about or invest my energy in. And I think my husband would probably say to live his best life that he can. And I think we both prioritize family and friends as well.
Yeah, and how are your kids doing now that this is are they
They're
h
great.
are they're much older now, are
They're
they?
both in college,
Okay,
freshman and senior.
okay, great. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for sharing
Thank
your
you.
story. It's such a unique story, and I think that there will be a lot of people that will appreciate this. So thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you. Be sure to follow us and subscribe to our podcast on Amazon, Spotify, Apple, or iHeart. You can also subscribe to the video version of the podcast on YouTube. Thanks so much.